I'm Teresa Skupic, and this is Forum Daily for Tuesday, April 21st. Prime Minister Mark Carney has unveiled the members of his new advisory committee on Canada-U.S. economic relations. The group brings together a mix of experts, including ex-Quebec Premier Jean Charest, former Conservative leader Erin O'Toole, and former Conservative Cabinet Minister Lisa Raitt. The committee is expected to advise the federal government on trade and economic ties with the United States.
The council will give advice to. I lost my breath. I got to get back in shape. Minister LeBlanc, myself, Madame Charette as the negotiator, other ministers. I'm very pleased to have that group. It's a diverse group, leaders from the union movement, experts in industry, and CEOs in finance and across the economy.
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was asked for his reaction.
You had previously suggested that there ought to be an all-party committee of some kind that would be tasked with answering exactly these questions and working in a consensus manner, I think. Do you still have that position, or do you think the majority government that's not possible?
Sure, I think it's a great idea. But at the end of the day, what you need is to have a prime minister who's focused not on illusions and showboating, but on actually fighting the tariffs. We've got 2.6 million jobs that depend on getting rid of these tariffs. We have whole lumber towns that might disappear, towns that may not have any people in them in a couple of years if we don't get rid of softwood lumber tariffs. Windsor is reeling. A $16 billion industry in Windsor has just been smashed with increased tariffs on particularly mold making. Have you heard Mark Carney even mention it? He was busy waving around a figurine of Sir Isaac Brock, comparing himself to a 19th century war hero. And yet he doesn't have a single word to utter about the people of Windsor whose jobs are hemorrhaging in light of these new tariffs. He refuses to stand up against these wrong-headed American tariffs. He's done absolutely nothing on this file in the last year other than use it to stoke fear and distract from his catastrophic failings here at home.
A new refund process was launched Monday for businesses that paid tariffs later struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court. U.S. Customs and Border Protection says importers and their brokers can begin filing claims online. It's the first step in what's expected to be a complicated process, one that could eventually lead to refunds for some consumers as well. At a press conference last week, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent was asked what the process will look like for American businesses trying to get tariff refunds following a recent U.S. Supreme Court ruling.
On Monday of next week, importers can start requesting claims for tariff refunds. And my understanding is $127 billion eligible for refunds. What's that process look like? How can a porter and an importer request such a refund going forward?
That's not being run out of Treasury. We will just be the paymaster. So that's being run out of CPB. Yep.
And so explain that process. I understand you're not running it. How does that process actually work? If you're an importer, you paid these tariffs, the Supreme Court found that those tariffs were illegal. What's the process for them to get back that money?
Well, they would be in touch with the CPB, and I think the number you're quoting is so that's the amount who have already requested refunds. So they are already in the chute, and we'll see what the timeline is for that.
Will that affect the U.S. economy, all of those refunds coming out of the U.S. Treasury?
We'll have to see what comes out, and we'll have to see what the companies do with them.
And talks between the United States and Iran are still being planned, but rising tensions in the Strait of Hormuz are putting them at risk. Pakistan said Monday it's preparing to host the meeting, even as a fragile ceasefire nears its midweek deadline. Over the weekend, the U.S. seized an Iranian-flagged cargo ship, prompting Iran to vow a response. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi called the move a sign of bad faith ahead of the talks. Pakistan's interior minister has met with both sides in Islamabad to keep negotiations on track, but it's unclear if they will go ahead. Canadian drivers are facing a brutal reality at the pumps this morning. Gasoline in many parts of the country is nearing $2 a liter. The spike is driven by the widening conflict in Iran, which has paralyzed the Strait of Hormuz. With around 20% of the world's oil and gas supply effectively trapped, nations globally are taking desperate measures, shortening work weeks and closing universities to save fuel. As a net energy exporter, Canada remains significantly less exposed to the shortages threatening Europe and Asia. We are feeling the hit to our wallets, but for now, Canada's energy independence is keeping the lights on and the country moving. But how long will this continue? Minister of Transportation Stephen McKinnon defended his government's approach to this issue during question period.
Mr. Speaker, it is today, the day where we implement the 10-cent per liter reduction on gasoline in Canada. Also 4 cents a liter on diesel, and Mr. Speaker, 4 cents a liter on jet fuel. These are important reductions. They go with the groceries and essentials benefit that we've already brought in to this House. This government is doing many things to help Canadians with affordability.
This assistance we are offering on a one-time basis because of this international conflict, which is causing shortages in petrol, and the Canadian government is proud to add these measures to all the other measures it has implemented to help make it easier for Canadians.
Our Western Canada Bureau Chief Hal Roberts sat down with Brian Gould, the CEO of Aspen Leaf Energy Limited, to discuss the long-term outlook for Canadian consumers.
Brian, some people believe that Canada is being taken advantage of when it comes to producing crude. You send it down to the United States to be refined, and then we have to buy it back at a premium. Are we getting a raw deal?
So in essence, the market works and it's incredibly efficient. So I want to put a stop to this commentary about Canada getting a raw deal. First off, on our crude oil, we supply our heavy oil to the United States, where they have refineries that are equipped to handle that. And conversely, we bring light American oil to Eastern Canada, where our refineries are equipped to handle that oil. And the market globally is incredibly efficient and takes into account the type of oil, its quality, and how far it has to get moved. So this commentary about we're getting kind of a raw deal on our oil that we sell, in my view, is not true, so long as we have sufficient pipeline capacity to match our production. On the product side, when you think about things like gasoline and fuel and jet fuels, the converse is true. The market is efficient, and it is determined largely by the input of the global price of oil. But Canada is relatively self-sufficient in terms of its capacity to refine oil relative to its needs for those products. Now, that's not true locally everywhere. There are exchanges of products across the border, but that's an efficient market, and it gives Canadians the lowest price possible for the products that they want to consume. So this question about us getting a raw deal, in my view, is patently untrue.
So, Brian, even with Europe and Asia facing a fuel crisis right now, is there a point where the Canadian government has to really prioritize domestic supply over international exports?
So my view is no. We have adequate supplies within North America, as I described, between Canada and the U.S. to meet our domestic needs in both countries. The surplus gets exported globally, and I don't see anything on the horizon that suggests that exports will take precedence over domestic requirements, and therefore that we need some kind of constraint on that. So no, I think that would be a needless government intervention.
So as an industry leader, do you believe maybe Ottawa needs to implement temporary price caps or subsidies to prevent a total supply chain collapse as prices continue to soar?
No, so the supply chain is robust, and in essence, if the government puts in caps, in my view, that would be equivalent to having National Energy Program 2.0, which is essentially saying that we will not live within the global commodity marketplace. And that leads, in my view, in the longer term, to a starvation of investment capital to maintain that supply. So I think it would be incredibly counterproductive to start putting in price caps. And Canada is desperately in need of capital investment to alleviate our productivity problem. And such a move would be incredibly counterproductive.
You know, dozens of countries have introduced policies to ration fuel and electricity right now. Do you think Canada would ever reach that point?
we don't need to ration because we have adequate supplies of both. So no, our situation is different than others because we have such a bountiful supply of energy and the infrastructure to supply our own domestic markets. Very different than some of these other countries that are totally dependent on imports for their energy needs. But this underscores for me the importance of energy in our society, not just in our economy, but for our very way of life. And we have done the energy conversation, in my view, a great disservice in the way that the narratives have unfolded over the last decade or so.
CEO and founder of Aspen Leaf Energy Limited here in Calgary, Brian Gould, thanks for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Pierre Poilievre is accusing Prime Minister Mark Carney of pushing fear after Carney warned Canadians about the country's economic relationship with the United States. In a 10-minute social media video on Sunday, Carney said Canada's close economic ties with the U.S., once seen as a strength, have become a vulnerability. He argued Canada shouldn't wait for a return to past levels of cooperation and should instead focus on expanding trade with other partners. Poilievre responded Monday with his own video, calling the timing of Carney's remarks strangely timed and suggesting that they were meant to distract from domestic issues like inflation.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister released yet another video that repeated the same speech that he's been giving for the last year about the U.S. He recycled the same promises and reused the same old lines, this time with a little more dramatic flair. There was even a nude figurine on display. But it was all strangely timed for the day before Statistics Canada inflation data would show that in March, we again had the worst food price inflation in the G7. Now, it's not surprising that the Prime Minister wants to distract from his costly failures by pushing fear and re-upping his rhetoric yesterday. But let's compare that rhetoric to the reality. He promised to double home building, but his own housing agency now expects home building to fall 18%. He promised to build big projects, but what's really getting built? His new major projects office has approved not one single new major project, not one major pipeline, not one major development.
PEI Premier Rob Lance said Monday that he thought Prime Minister Mark Carney's recent address was poorly worded, though he still believes Canada and the United States have a long, prosperous future ahead. Speaking at a panel in Ottawa, Lance told reporters there's no sense in antagonizing a key trading partner while negotiations are ongoing, but said that he does support Carney's broader plan to strengthen Canada's economy.
There's many things with the Prime Minister's approach that I agree with and I'm very happy about, but I didn't like that choice of word. Weakness is not the way I would put it. Susan just said vulnerability might be a better word. I'm not sure how I'd describe it, but
what's the difference, Chairman?
Well, look, it's true that the U.S. is a very, very important trading partner for us, always has been, and we're maybe a little too reliant on easy access to that market. In Atlantic Canada, we have got very long-standing social, cultural, familial ties with the New England states in particular, which is where the vast majority of our exports go to. And Prince Edward Island has built a very, very strong export economy over the last several decades that we traditionally didn't have. It's much more diversified and than it used to be. So when I travel to New England, I see that we have many allies there. I meet with governors, we all meet with governors. We do have many allies, and the Trump era will end. I think that what we are seeing is an opportunity to build new trade relationships around the world, and we're doing that. But I still see a long, prosperous future ahead of us with our relationship with the United States. The Trump era will end.
In his address, Carney says that he intends to regularly update Canadians on efforts to reduce reliance on the U.S. by diversifying trade relationships. And could a recession be heading our way? Well, according to a former Bank of Canada governor, the odds are now sitting at about 30%. It's a warning that comes as global pressure really starts to hit home. We're watching the ongoing conflict in the Middle East closely, where blockades and damage to production sites are sending shockwaves through the market. For those of us at the pump, that means it's a very real threat of a global energy crisis. But it's not just here in Canada. The International Monetary Fund is also sounding the alarm this week. Their latest outlook warns that if the fighting continues, the entire global economy could be pushed to the brink, calling this current risk tremendous. I sat down with economist Dr. Moshe Lander to break down these numbers. Now, Dr. Lander, a 30% chance of a recession to the average person might seem low, but in economic terms, how concerned should Canadians be?
I think when we put a 30% chance, a 70% chance, a 20% chance, they're numbers. I feel that a lot of Canadians these days are not looking at the chance of a recession to Canada. What they're looking at is the chances of a recession to themselves personally. The kids these days, Teresa, call it a me session. I can't stand the phrase, but I like the idea. If you have a job, your friends have a job, your family have jobs, then if I told you that Canada's in a recession, you'd look around and say, I don't know what you're talking about. And the same thing then is true in reverse. If you don't have a job, your friends don't have a job, your family don't have a job, and I say, hey, the Canadian economy is roaring along, you look around and say, I don't know what you're talking about. So I think that in this social media world in which we're very hyper localized, uh, the percentage chance of a recession to Canada is almost irrelevant. I think Canadians that are concerned about cost of living and affordability are going to say, look, I really don't care what happens with the macro economy. How does this affect me personally?
Now, the International Monetary Fund used the word tremendous to describe the downside risks. Is Canada better positioned than our neighbors to weather this, or are we just as vulnerable?
We're always at risk for global events affecting Canada, but we're also at risk for what happens to the US economy and how it affects Canada. I don't think the same is true in reverse when it comes to the US. They might be exposed to global risks, but they're not really as affected by what goes on in Canada. You can even see, for example, in Trump's tariffs over the last 15 months, how many Canadians have stopped going to the US. Tourism numbers I think, are down 4.2 million visits. And while some local parts of the US economy are saying to Canadians, hey, would you please come back? The US doesn't really seem to care that Canadians are not traveling to the US anymore. It's not that they're immune from what happens on this side of the border. It's just that they're much more diverse. Howard Lutnick made the comment, unfortunately, where he said that they, referring to Canada, sucks. But his point was that it's almost like it's kind of an annoying fly that's around your head when it comes to the way that the U.S. views Canada. But the U.S. is clearly the elephant in the room, and we're the mouse, I believe, as the father Trudeau once said when he was prime minister.
Now, we're seeing prices at the pump jump again and then drop and then jump. How much is this tied to a recession risk? Is it just tied strictly to energy versus internal factors like housing or interest rates?
Yeah, so right now, what's going on at the pump is not really the driver of whether there would be a recession or not. What really matters is how fast does that factor at the pump start to spill over into the broader part of the economy. Let's remember that oil and gas is not just going to be at the pump. At some point, that starts to affect heating and cooling of your home. In Alberta, where I am, we use natural gas to heat our homes. So if oil and gas prices go high, then when summer comes and I reach for the air conditioning, that means that my energy costs are going to go up as well. So that's yet one more part of my budget that's being absorbed into an energy crisis set of costs. At some point, it shows up into packaging and plastics. I don't remember a lot about my elementary school science classes, but I do remember hearing that petrochemicals are used to create these byproducts then. And so at what point then does just the packaging of food itself, not even the food, become more expensive? Food becomes more expensive because fertilizer is also going to go up in price. It's one of the lesser commented issues of closing the Strait of Hormuz is a huge amount of fertilizer goes through the strait. And so where Canadians might say, we don't buy it from there, that's fine. We don't. But somebody does. And if they find that they can't get it, they start going looking for other sources of fertilizer. That pushes up fertilizer prices for all. And so that means then that the actual act of growing the food is going to become more expensive. So then you start to see it at the grocery store. It shows up in jet fuel. We've already heard the major airlines say we're adding these one-time fuel charges to try and cover this extra cost. That means then that business becomes more expensive. If you have to fly to a meeting, if you have to fly to a conference, if you have to go meet a maid supplier, that's going to now cost more money. Somebody has to pay for that. So that's where the risk of the recession comes in, is that once this spills over beyond the pump, then we could really find ourselves in a lot of trouble where prices start to rise rapidly.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the address that Mark Carney made on Sunday, which
to a lot of Canadians, seemed like a warning. How ready do you think the Carney government is for if or when a recession actually hits, and what could Canadians be looking at?
Yeah, I don't think that the Carney government is ready, but to be fair, I don't think that any Canadian government of any political stripe would be ready either. It's kind of one of those unprecedented times that we seem to be using more and more often to describe the times in which we live. We think that it's a one-off event, and then it's quickly followed by another one-off unprecedented times event. The government doesn't have a lot of capacity to help Canadians because they already have these very large deficits and a rising debt to GDP ratio. And that's still the aftermath effects of COVID and Russia's invasion of Ukraine and all of the other supply shocks that we've been seeing landing in the last decade that were generally not happening is since the 1970s. So there's not a lot of capacity then for any government to try and help. And that's why we're seeing even at the provincial level that the provinces of all political stripes are kind of hands in their pockets saying, did you just see the budget numbers that we put forward? We don't have the capacity to help you. So that obviously puts them in a weak position. The renegotiation of NAFTA, you're dealing with a crazy person on the other side of the border who is committed to not supporting free trade. It's the only item that he's been consistent on for 40 years in the public eye. As a property mogul back in those days in the 1980s in New York, he didn't like free trade then. There's no way that he's going to come around to liking it now. So where the other political parties are saying, why can't you negotiate a deal? It's because the other side doesn't want a deal. So that has nothing to do with who's the prime minister or which party is governing. It's nobody's going to be able to get through on that. So that's always going to expose Canada then.
Well, Dr. Lander, thank you so much for the time.
Anytime.
A tragic incident unfolded Monday at the famous Teotihuacan Pyramids, one of Mexico's most popular tourist destinations. Authorities say a man opened fire at the site, killing a Canadian woman and injuring several others before taking his own life. Emergency crews rushed in, and Mexico's security cabinet confirmed that those who were hurt are now receiving medical care. Claudia Scheinbaum says her government will investigate the deadly shooting at a historic pyramid site that left one Canadian tourist dead and another injured. Anita Anand spoke with reporters this morning and addressed how the Canadian government is dealing with this news.
I spoke with my Mexican counterpart this morning, and he committed to undertaking an investigation into the death of a Canadian citizen on Mexican soil. We will remain in contact over the coming days, and I want to assure Canadians that our consular officials are on the ground assisting the remaining victims, and in particular the Canadians who are in Mexico. Of course, I express my own condolences to the family of the victim, and I will leave no stone unturned in ensuring that Canadians are supported abroad and that this investigation uncovers facts relating to the death, the murder of a Canadian citizen on Mexican soil.
The tragedy is also prompting wider conversations back home about safety, accountability, and how Canada responds to complex cases involving its citizens. Meanwhile, a separate court ruling is raising new questions about how the law applies to temporary residents. Our contributor, David Clement, joins us for more.
In a ruling that's raising eyebrows across Canada, an international student from India living here on an expired permit has been allowed to remain in the country despite his involvement in an attempted luxury car theft. The case centers around a 21-year-old man who arrived in Canada in 2022 on a valid study permit. He was enrolled in college but dropped out after 2 semesters, becoming homeless, jobless, and by his own admission, addicted to marijuana. His study permit expired on July 30th of 2024, leaving him without any legal status. 2 months later, on September 21st, 2024, he flew from Ontario to Vancouver after an acquaintance promised him a construction job. Instead, the man was taken to a basement apartment, given new clothes, and driven to a Vancouver auto dealership. There, he was told to use a fake ID and credit card to purchase a 2019 BMW 330 valued at more than $37,000. When the dealership staff spotted the fraud, they called police. The acquaintance vanished, and the student was arrested. Vancouver police investigated, but Crown prosecutors chose not to lay criminal charges. The case was handed to Canada Border Services Agency, which prepared a report alleging the man was inadmissible to Canada because he had participated in organized crime. That allegation went before the Immigration Division. The agency initially rejected the organized crime claim. The Minister of Public Safety appealed. Earlier this year, tribunal member Marianne Kingma delivered her detailed ruling. She found that there were reasonable grounds to believe the man had committed domestic crimes, attempted theft of a vehicle, identity fraud, and forgery, but she ruled that he was not part of any criminal organization. She said, quote, "I find that the respondent was a dupe whose personal circumstances led him into trouble. It was trouble that a local prosecutor did not consider worth pursuing for a domestic criminal charge." She added that he went along with the auto dealership events as they unfolded on the day of execution, and that he was coerced and had no knowledge of or involvement in any organized criminal activity. His trip to Vancouver, she said, was an attempt to solve immediate survival problems, not to join a car theft ring. Because the organized crime allegation failed, the man is now legally allowed to stay in Canada. The decision has sparked a fresh debate about Canada's immigration enforcement, especially for temporary residents who lose status but remain in the country anyway. Critics question why someone involved in a deliberate fraud attempt was not removed, while supporters of the ruling argue the tribunal correctly distinguished between a one-time mistake by a vulnerable individual and genuine organized crime. For now, the student remains in Canada, his future here protected by a ruling that says being a dupe is not the same as being a criminal mastermind.
The Alberta government is investing $600 million over the next 3 years to help deal with the large influx of students. Officials say more than 80,000 new students are now in Alberta classrooms over the past few years, driven mostly by the federal immigration policies and interprovincial migration. Alberta Education and Childcare Minister Demetrio Nicolaides says they are funding 160 new modular classrooms to help accommodate so many new students.
Nearly 2/3 of these new modulars are going to Calgary and Edmonton, where schools are under the most pressure, and the rest are heading to other growing communities outside of our largest cities. Every decision is based on clear province-wide criteria like enrollment, building use, and student safety. In total, 33 school boards will receive modular classrooms, with the majority of them being allocated to communities that are facing the fastest and largest enrollment growth.
Alberta government officials say they are meeting with our country's largest grocers to discuss food affordability. With food prices continuing to climb, Service Alberta Minister Dale Nally says the province is meeting with grocery owners to help lower costs for Albertans. Premier Danielle Smith says the government is asking grocery store owners what can be done to bring down the price of food staples. Food prices in Canada have risen by more than 30% since 2019. The average family of 4 is expected to spend over $17,000 on food alone this year. And the Alberta government is moving ahead with a plan to adopt permanent daylight saving time, a shift that would end the twice-a-year clock changes. The move, expected to be introduced through legislation, means clocks would no longer fall back this autumn. Instead, Alberta would stay on summer hours year-round, aiming to provide more evening daylight and better align with steps taken by British Columbia. The change would also bring Alberta in line with Saskatchewan, which already observes Central Standard Time year-round. Although a 2021 referendum narrowly rejected it by 50.2%, the current government is now pushing forward with the change through legislation. And Ontario Premier Doug Ford says he feels more scrutinized than anyone else in the country as he defended and then walked back his government's plan to buy a $29.9 million private jet. Speaking to reporters at an unrelated event in Ottawa, Ford says he's heard loud and clear from people across the province that now isn't the right time for that kind of purchase.
Well, I heard loud and clear because I'm the only person in the world that gives out a cell number. And I heard loud and clear from the people that this was not the time to purchase a plane. So I've directed the staff, provincial staff, to be in contact, which they are, with Bombardier, sell it immediately and at the same cost. We took possession last week. I immediately sent that message out to the media. I heard from the people. And I'm the premier that listens to the people. If they don't like something, I'm not too shy to change my mind and say, okay, this isn't the time to move on. I also understand the scrutiny. You know, there's no one in this country that is scrutinized more than I am. I'm willing to take that. What kind of really disturbs me is the inconsistency with the media. We have the federal government, rightfully so, and let's put the Prime Minister to the side, that they went out and bought $753 million of jets for the ministers, rightfully so, by the way. We live in a massive country. No word. When it comes to the Quebec, buying $107 million of 3 jets, which I agree. They live in a massive province. No scrutiny. But when I do it, I guess there's a double standard. And that's my position. I have to take that. But I just want to explain to the people, you know, our province is massive. I have to get to the north numerous times. There are no charter flights up in the north. This was not Doug Ford's plane. I'm going to repeat that. It was not Doug Ford's plane. It was a government plane used by multiple ministries. I'll give you one example, Ontario Corps. If we need to send a team up north where no charter flights are, no commercial flights are, we charter a flight. We charter a flight for firefighters going up to fight wildfires. And I thought if it's a multi-ministerial plane for the province, not my personal plane that the media wants to paint it out to be, which was never the case. Yes, am I going to use it? 100%. But it was for multiple ministries.
The province had announced the jet's purchase but reversed course just a day later on Sunday after facing backlash. The Lapu-Lapu Day of Togetherness was meant as a moment of reflection, remembrance, and healing, held nearly a year after 11 people were killed during the festival in Vancouver. Organizers and attendees gathered to honor the victims and support one another, marking the anniversary of a tragedy that deeply impacted the community. But the event also highlighted lingering divisions. While many saw it as an important step towards healing, some relatives of victims said that it still feels too soon for a public gathering of this nature, noting that grief remains very raw. As the community continues to process what happened, the event underscored both the desire to come together and the ongoing difficulty of finding the right time and way to do so.
You know, I still find it difficult to be in the area where the festival happened last year. And again, this was very intentional, the way, you know, this space has been chosen, the way this space has been laid out, to keep in mind and ensure that this is, you know, reflective of how the event needed to take shape for people to feel safe, secure, and be able to, again, be in community. I can't imagine, you know, the grief and frustration that people who were directly physically impacted would feel. And certainly, like, you know, for people who are still experiencing, you know these difficulties that we've engaged with, we ask them to respond to their caseworker. We ask them to, you know, engage with us, again, in good faith. I would say, you know, like, for anybody trying to put themselves out there to help people, to be accused of something that you're not doing is hurtful. But we also recognize that people are hurting as well.
I'm still going through suffering and pain every day. I break every single day, and then I rebuild myself, and then the next day I break. So it's a constant battle of just trying to survive and live. Practice what you preach. If you're saying you're going to help the victims, truly help them.
A mother and her 6 children were killed after an explosion and fire tore through a home in central Pennsylvania. Fire crews were called Sunday morning to a report of an explosion in Lamar Township. When firefighters arrived, they found the home fully engulfed in flames. Officials say the victims included a 34-year-old woman and her 6 children, ranging in age from 3 to 11. Neighbors described hearing a sudden blast followed by heavy smoke and flames as emergency crews rushed to the scene. One witness shared what they saw and heard in the moments after the explosion.
I heard a boom and I could feel it. And I got up and looked out the window and I could see the flames through the windows. And I come running outside, and within a minute the whole house was completely engulfed. They started calling in extra units, and I believe it was a second alarm fire. We have a scanner, so I was listening to it on there. And yeah, it by the time they got there, there was no saving that house. It went up so fast.
The BC government has had a change of heart and is now backing away from introducing legislation to suspend parts of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples Act. Premier Eby's office told a First Nations leader recently that he would introduce the legislation shortly that suspend parts of the Indigenous law, but has since changed his mind. Now, the province says it will not be bringing in any changes to the so-called DRIPA legislation this session. Speaking to reporters after this decision, Premier David Eby explained the government's new stance on this issue.
Well, I certainly would have liked to have been right the first time. I was not. How about the fifth time? This is challenging work. This is one of the hardest files I've ever worked on, and I've had other files that were hard and required multiple steps. The car insurance file comes to mind, but that was nothing compared to this. This is both a combination of an historic legacy of government and our relationship with First Nations, as well as doing work we've never done before to try to provide stability and a path forward for prosperity for the whole province, work that has to be done. The courts are very clear about that. And I accept the responsibility of taking us in different directions, trying to find that path to respond to these court decisions. There is a very real threat to our province and continued conflict with First Nations. That's why our government is committed to finding, if at all possible, collaborative paths forward. We want to move past the court battles, past the blockades, past those issues, and that was what the Declaration Act was all about.
The BC Court of Appeal ruled last year that the province's mineral claims regime does not line up with the legislation to uphold the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It is a decision the Premier has said creates a large amount of legal uncertainty. And Statistics Canada says airfares rose year over year for the first time in nearly 2 years in March amid sky-high jet fuel prices. Agency data shows that plane ticket prices rose 2.9% last month compared with March of 2025. A National Bank analyst notes that the last time the Consumer Price Index notched year-over-year increase for air travel was June of 2024. They say ballooning jet fuel prices is driving the recent fare surge, with airlines passing some of the cost on to passengers. On a month-to-month basis, fares rose nearly 5%. And Ottawa is expanding air travel with China, allowing more direct flights for both passengers and cargo. Transport Minister Stephen McKinnon says the increase will be gradual and comes after Prime Minister Mark Carney's visit to Beijing earlier this year. Under the changes, airlines from both countries can add more passenger routes and run up to 20 cargo flights a week with equal access on both sides. Ottawa says this should help promote trade diversification and tourism, as Canada looks to increase exports to China by 50% by 2030. There was a dramatic start to the playoff series with Edmonton, where the Oilers battled back for a thrilling 4-3 win over the Anaheim Ducks. Kasperi Kapanen was the hero, scoring a second goal of the night with just over a minute left in the third period to seal the comeback victory.
Kapanen, I think his nickname's Senior on the team. Draisaitl, he'll be mad at you. Draisaitl on his backhand, trying to tuck it in front. On Anaheim close-up shot, now put goals in. Jet in front, score! Kasperi Kapanen! Edmonton regains the lead!
It was a welcome sight for fans as star forward Leon Draisaitl returned to the lineup after missing the final 14 games of the regular season due to an injury. He made an immediate impact with 2 assists alongside Jake Wallman, who also added a pair of helpers. For the Ducks, Troy Terry had a strong night with 2 goals and an assist, while Leo Carlsson added a goal of his own as Anaheim made its first playoff appearance since 2018. Game 2 of the best-of-7 series goes Wednesday back in Edmonton. And over in the Metropolitan Division, the Carolina Hurricanes took care on home ice with a 2-0 series lead after a wild Game 2 that needed double overtime. A game that had just about everything: a disallowed goal, a missed penalty shot, and a dramatic finish to cap it all off. It looked like Carolina had won it in the first overtime when Mark Jankowski buried a rebound, but the celebration didn't last long. After a video review, officials ruled the play offside, and the goal was waved off.
Jankowski on the boards with it. Dumps it off to Chatfield. Chatfield back for Jankowski to Jarvis. Shot. Hallmark save. Rebound scores. Jankowski overtime winner.
There it comes. Sounds like it's going to be no goal.
After the review, it was determined that the play was offside. There is no goal.
But as Dave Jackson told us, the slashing still stands.
Shot for being fouled from behind on a breakaway.
That reversal set up a rare playoff moment, a penalty shot in overtime. Jordan Martinook stepped up for the Canes, but he was turned away and the game kept going. Martinook would get another chance later in the night, and this time he didn't miss.
Gaines to the rebound. Miller. He gets this one in. There's Martinook. He scores! This one counts. Jordan Martinook wins it in overtime.
Now the series shifts to Ottawa for Game 3 on Thursday. Away from the ice in Carolina, another kind of ice was drawing plenty of attention in Toronto. Somewhere inside a towering stack of ice blocks in a downtown Toronto parking lot, fans believe they may find the answer to one of hip-hop's biggest questions: when Drake is dropping his next album. On Monday, the Toronto rapper posted photos on Instagram showing the frozen installation along with its coordinates and the caption "release date" inside. That was all it took to send fans scrambling. Locals quickly gathered at the site, snapping photos and videos while swapping theories about what's hidden inside and when the ice will finally melt to reveal details about Drake's long-awaited project, reportedly titled Iceman. And a hot air balloon landed in a Southern California backyard over the weekend, a balloon with 13 people inside. The enormous hot air balloon descended perfectly Saturday on a narrow area of grass in a couple's backyard. Hunter Perrin says that he had no idea that he had visitors until a neighbor had alerted him. One of the passengers says that the pilot informed them that there was an emergency landing and it was necessary because of low fuel and weak winds. A couple that was riding in the balloon said that they were celebrating their 10th wedding anniversary.
Hi, everybody. Look at that. Wow. Hi, everybody. It's just our house, and then, wow.
I'm Teresa Skubik. Good night, Canada.